Welcome. This yin sequence will consist of Dragonfly posture with a lateral bend on either side, and then Butterfly Pose, both sides of Sleeping Swan Pose, and finally Sphinx Pose. Useful props will be soft padding like blankets and pillows, but also if you have a couple of yoga blocks, those might be handy as well. And if you don't have blocks, then a bolster, a couch cushion, or some books, some firm books might be of use. The theme for class will be a Luminaria, which is a classic holiday decoration predominantly found in the southwestern US. This practice starts by finding and cultivating some inner ground. And you can do that by taking a comfortable seat. It could be sitting cross-legged like I'm sitting, but it can be some other seat. Just have a little bit of space around your torso. Get settled. Find some stability, some safety, some ease, some comfort in your seat. And so it might take a while. You might have to wiggle around. So give yourself permission to do so that you feel really set in your seat. And then maybe create a nice neutral spine. You do that by feeling tall in your spine. So there's a little bit of toning in the muscles in your torso just to kind of raise the crown of your head up towards the ceiling. Your tailbone is trying to kind of drift towards the ground. And you have that feeling of length that creates a nice stable spine here. And then give yourself a moment to process your thoughts. Give yourself permission to have space and time available for practice. Notice your thoughts. Notice your breath. Change from observing your thoughts to noticing that your breath is almost always there, regardless of what's going on in the brain here. We'll do a few exercises to continue cultivate this idea of inner ground here. So you can maybe begin to slow the breath and deepen the breath. So my personal definition of deepening the breath means to slow it and to pay attention to it. So instead of normal regular breaths, we maybe increase the duration of each inhale, increase the duration of each exhale. It doesn't have to be by a lot, like to the point of strain, just to the point where it takes a little bit of attention and focus to maintain that slow breath, but it is comfortable, it is accessible here. And I'll include a little bit of an exercise to help cultivate some breath awareness. This is a vinyasa sequence that I just call heart opening. So what you do is you take your hands, take your index fingers and your thumb and make a big circle and just place it roughly where your heart center is, so the upper chest somewhere. And then next time you need to inhale and sweep your hands and arms out in front of you and then sweep them out to the side, all the way so that they're kind of in line with your torso here. And then as you exhale, bring your arms back, and as you do so, form that circle again with your fingers and bring it back to the heart center here. So we'll do this 3 more cycles here. So a nice big gentle inhale, arms sweep out wide, and then a nice big gentle exhale, arms come back, fingers meet at heart center here. So a few more cycles here. I'm going to do 2 more here. Inhaling, arms come out, exhale, arms come back in. You can do a few more if you're liking this. And then inhale, expand out, and then exhale. Bring everything back. So you're kind of cultivating energy, spreading it out through the world, and then gathering it back to your place of connection, which symbolically, metaphorically, is the heart center. It's the heart that symbolizes connection here you have with yourself and with the world. Bring your breath back to normal, and then we'll do a few little yang warm-up exercises before we get into the long-held yin postures. So make your way onto your belly. Legs comfortably extended out behind you. do some locust cycling. So locust poses are some yang back bends here. If you can, try to keep your legs and your feet together. If that's too uncomfortable or awkward, then legs and feet can be comfortable width apart. Arms are extended alongside your torso, palms face up. And then kind of root the front of your low torso, kind of the front of your pelvic bone into the ground. And then on your next inhale, maybe just a baby locust here. So engage the muscles in the back side of your torso. Lift your heart up, maybe kind of reach it forward. It doesn't have to go very far. Head and neck are kind of lifting too at the same time. And then exhale, lower everything down. Maybe take a resting breath here. So again, we'll do a few cycles of this. So on your next inhale, inhale and lift your shoulders up. So the feet are on the ground, hands are on the ground. You're trying to lift your chest up off of the ground, your shoulders up towards the ceiling. Head and neck are kind of lifting up, but they can stay neutral here. Maybe you lift a little bit higher and then very gently lower yourself back down to the ground. 1 or 2 resting breaths here. A couple more cycles. You can just continue to do that type of locust pose. If you want more of a challenge, then on this third one, we'll try to lift the legs and the arms a little bit. So on the inhale, just like we did before, or raise your arms a little bit, raise your legs up off of the floor here. And then lower yourself back down. Couple resting breaths, one final round. So again, it can be the one like we started with, or if you want a little bit more challenge, as you inhale, begin to lift everything. So heart lifts off the floor, arms lift off the floor, legs lift off the floor. Maybe go as high as you can, and then lower yourself back down to the ground. Maybe a resting breath or two before you move. But when you are ready, hands come up to the side of your shoulders and then lift yourself up into a table pose. Lift yourself up on the hands and knees. So a little bit more warming exercise. These are actually core exercises here. So root through your hands and your legs. Feel stable here. And then extend your right leg out behind you. Heel raises up to the height of your torso, and then extend your left arm forward. We'll do some knee to elbow cycles. So bend your knees, bend your elbow, and draw them towards each other. As your spine, your torso rounds up towards the ceiling, just as far as they go. You don't have to touch. They're just moving towards each other until they stop, and then lengthen yourself back out. And then bring it all in again. So elbow and knee bends just as far as you go. Maybe they touch, maybe they don't. Doesn't really matter. Not long. Just one more of these cycles on this side. So maybe on an inhale or an exhale, you round. And then on the other cycle of the breath, you expand out. And then come back to table pose. Maybe take a resting breath and then 3 of those cycles on the other side. So this time, root through your right knee, extend your left leg out, left heel, kind of pressing back and up the height of your torso. Right arm extends, lengthen out here, and then elbow and knee bend and move towards each other as your spine rounds up towards the ceiling. Go ahead and lengthen everything out, and then another cycle of this. Maybe on an exhale, if you like a breath cadence, inhale and lengthen back out here. One final exhale, and then lengthen back out, and then come back to hands and knees. And then from here, we'll go ahead and get into the yin posture. So the first long held yin posture is Dragonfly Pose, which is a wide-legged forward fold, seated forward fold. I'm going to use a couple of blocks myself for this posture, so you can decide if you'd like to sit up on a little bit of height. You'll come to seated, legs extended out in front. And then in Yin, Dragonfly is the seated wide-legged forward fold. So you bring your legs as wide apart as they go until they stop. So you can move slowly so you find an appropriate stopping point. Legs are extended, but they don't need to be straight. So the knees can be bent if they need to be bent. In fact, they can be bent pretty dramatically if they need to be here. Again, you're trying to make your posture here. And you can relax through the legs. So once you've made the general shape with the legs, if they can roll in, they can roll out. You're not necessarily holding them in place here. And then from here, we'll actually do this posture twice. We'll include a lateral bend. So for those of you who really like forward folds, you could just forward fold in this posture and stay here for 6 minutes. But I'm going to do a lateral bend on one side or another. This is where another prop comes in handy. So for another block, place the other block by the right knee. Grow tall through your torso. Turn and face the left leg. And then I'm going to laterally just bend over to the right. And this is where the prop comes in handy. So if you have a prop, you can just set your right knee or right elbow on the block. And then wherever you stop, you can just rest your head on your forearm like this. That if your head and neck are sensitive. Remember, if you have a block, you have different settings. So if lower setting can't reach it, use a higher setting. Some of you're probably just fine just hanging in midair if you have like a really strong neck. So this is fine too here. Or you can put the block on either side. There's nothing sacred about where the prop is. Block can be maybe on the other side here. You might notice where I have my left hand. Doesn't really matter what I do with the left arm. It can be here, can be here, can be here. Some people like to raise it up overhead, although in order to keep it there, it's a little bit yang. I like to just keep it behind my torso because that subtly kind of rolls my shoulder up and I'm doing more of a lateral bend than a forward bend here. So we'll stay there for a couple minutes. If you're feeling in pain, or this is too dramatic for you, back yourself off to a place where it feels like about 70-80% instead of 100% pain here. If the dragonfly legs are not working for you, try half butterfly legs. In other words, bend the left knee, bring the left heel in. You might have to pad the left knee with something. And then do the lateral bend. Try the lateral bend in half butterfly here. It might be less stressful for the bent leg here. Otherwise, if you find a version of full dragonfly that you can practice, then we'll stay here. So I'll remind you of the mechanics of a yin practice. So in yin, we're trying to give the muscle cells a break, and we're trying to emphasize getting into the deeper connective tissue. This is physically speaking. And we do that by trying to relax the muscle fibers and letting the traction go into the connective tissue. So the basic process is to first find your shape, find your edge, find your yoga pose that fits you, that fits your unique body. It's called finding your edge. And it's different for every one of us because every one of us has a unique body. No two human bodies are exactly the same, despite the fact that we seem to propagate that idea, but it's not true. It's like we're all different. And so you need to find your shape and be accepting and allowing of that shape. So when you find your shape, you're feeling some pressure, you're feeling some traction, but you're not forcing yourself into injury or trauma. So those are good indications that you haven't really found your edge here. So you're finding your stopping points here. That's finding your edge. Second principle is called stillness, and that means once you've found a shape that seems to work for you, you decide to stay there for a while. In our culture of move, 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 that's a hard concept to employ and understand. It takes great patience to do that. And then the third one is to actually stay for a while, stay for time. Let a few minutes pass here. So we've been here almost 3 minutes, maybe maybe 3 more breaths or so. Give yourself permission to come out early if you need to. Give yourself permission to stay longer if you like. This is easy to do in a video because you can always ignore the video or pause the video, right? There's no peer pressure from being in a group class here. It's just probably just you, maybe you and a friend or two, who knows. But yeah, take the pressure off and just stay as long as you want to. We've stayed on this side a pretty good long time, so we can go ahead and come up. You can use the right arm to help. You can press the hand into the ground and bring your torso back up. Maybe a little bit of wiggling around, inching around to work out the kinks in that torso. If you need to bring your legs in to give them a break for a while, maybe do that for a few breaths. Move slowly, because we're going to stay in Dragonfly and the other side of the lateral bend. So like I was mentioning, for those of you who are wanting to do just the simple forward fold, you're just going to stay if you like to stay there for a long time. Otherwise, for those of you who've got kind of the kinks worked out, come back to Dragonfly. Turn now the opposite direction. So we're facing the right leg. And now we're going to laterally bend over the left leg. So maybe you have a prop, maybe you don't here. And then find your version here. And again, you may not go very far in these lateral bends. So maybe you go over just a little bit and you stop. Maybe one block is not enough. Maybe it's fine. Maybe you're fine, but you feel frustrated because you think you want to go a little bit farther. It's like, well, maybe this is your stopping point today. So this is actually where you ended. This is where you end up. So maybe you can maybe you can accept that here. Now, if you watch your breath and continue to relax your muscles and stay here, your body might very naturally go deeper. In fact, I know for a fact that for most people it does, because I watch people in class, and as they're practicing a yin posture, they're slowly oozing deeper into the posture, even though they might not be noticing it. So you need a second pair of eyes to tell you that after 3 or 4 minutes that you're actually 2 inches deeper into a posture, 2 centimeters deeper. It's not obvious from your point of view. I can't be that second pair of eyes because this is just a video. And so you'll have to just trust yourself, which is kind of an ultimate advanced realization of practice, is when you get to the point in your practice where you can actually trust your own judgment as to what you're doing here. So we'll try to go for 2 more minutes. We've been here for a minute. Again, give yourself permission to come out. So the theme for class today is I thought I would talk about these this very basic candle lantern that's known as, I call it a Luminaria. You find them during holiday seasons, predominantly in the southwestern US, particularly around the winter holidays. And they're called luminarias. They're also called farolitos. So you may know it by the other name. It's basically a paper bag with some sand placed in the bottom for stability, and then just a simple votive candle. And that's lit. And then at night when it's really dark, when you have like hundreds of these just sitting around, it looks spectacular. It's the original holiday lights before there were electric lights, and it was easy for people to come by the brown paper bags because they're pretty common. They might still be pretty common, although I have a harder and harder time finding just plain paper bags in the store anymore. But that's the idea, and it's an interesting where they originated. So by the way, we have about 5 or 6 more breaths here on this side. Maybe you've had enough and you can come out, or maybe you're not feeling anything and you can go a little bit deeper here in the posture. So one of the origin stories for these farolitas, for these luminarias, the paper candle lanterns, originated in it was popular among the Spanish, particularly the Spanish that were settling in the early Americas. So back in the 15, 16, 1700s, the Spanish had a real the Spanish actually really liked Chinese lanterns, the very intricate paper lanterns that were made in China, and they were really fond. The Spanish were really fond of those intricate intricate paper lanterns, but they didn't have any, nor could they afford to make any of those intricate paper lanterns and themselves. But they did have a proliferation of these regular brown paper bags. We're done with this side of Dragonfly. So go ahead and plant your left hand on the ground. Use the left hand and your left arm to help maybe inch your torso back up. And then go ahead and kind of release everything. Maybe do a little few shoulder rolls here. And then maybe kind of wiggle your torso around. If you've been in Dragonfly this whole time, slowly bring your legs in. And then a little bit of motion. Point and flex the feet a few times and wiggle the feet and the toes around here. And then we'll go ahead and we'll get into the next Yin posture. The next Yin posture is a forward fold known as Butterfly Pose here. So for Butterfly, you'll come to seated again, legs out in front. And then bend both of your knees. Lower your knees out to either side. Bottoms of your feet come together. You're forming a rough diamond shape with your shins and your thighs here. And you can sit up on a little bit of height like I am doing. I don't really need to sit up on a block for this one, so I'm just sitting up on a blanket. Knees are kind of achy. Again, give your knees a break by putting a little bit of padding underneath them here. And then the idea is to maybe grow your spine up tall for a moment and then hinge forward, hinge from your hip sockets. You might not go very far, but you go until you stop here. And then you fold forward the rest of the way, however you go. Now maybe you go just a little bit before you find your stopping point. And then you want something for your head to rest on. I've got these two blocks here, so I can just rest my head on the two blocks here. Depending, and I can change the height of the block. Maybe I can go a little bit farther. Maybe the block needs to go on the foot here. So this is how you build stuff out of whatever props you might have available. Or you can just hang in midair here. By the way, if you would like something a little bit more challenging for most people, you can try a caterpillar instead. So an alternative that might actually be more strenuous for some people is to just keep your legs extended. And then just fold forward with your legs extended into caterpillar. So that's an option that might be easier, might be more challenging. So you have to figure that out by just experimenting with it. And then once you've found your shape, then this is where you decide to stay for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 minutes here. So a good thing to do is to notice your physical sensations, notice your mental state, and then notice your breath, and use your breath as that internal anchor. I'm going to talk about anchors and rooting here in a moment, because we can use the object of the Luminaria as a metaphorical representation of the whole self, the whole being, the whole person here. And you're getting to know that whole person through these slower meditative type practices where you're not in a hurry to jump around or go anywhere. You're just trying to just stay and notice how it feels like to stay. And what will happen is you get to know yourself a little bit better. You get to know what your mind does when it's staying, what your physical sensations does, what your breath does when it stays. We'll try to stay here a couple more minutes or so. But again, only if it feels okay. If it's feeling traumatic, if it's feeling desperate, then you have the power to come out and do something else for a while here. So the early Spanish that were settling in the Americas, they had a lot of these common brown paper bags, and they realized that they're not as fabulous or as intricate as the Chinese lanterns, but you could still use them. You can still put a candle in them, and if you put a lot of them together in a holiday setting at night, they look rather spectacular here. But I got to know them more on kind of a yoga level, is that an individual Farolito, an individual Luminaria, you can give it very deep metaphorical meaning as to represent the whole self, your whole self. And each part has a deep representation to it. So about 5 more breaths here. In butterfly, maybe you need to come out, or maybe you can sink a little bit deeper. Maybe you can adjust a prop here. I'll start out by talking about the very obvious thing you see when you see a Luminaria. You see the brown paper bag. And the brown paper bag is very symbolic of our superficial self. It's the self that we reveal to the outside world, and it's the self that the outside world sees first. So just a couple more breaths here. And then slowly begin to bring yourself up when you feel ready. Bring your knees back up. Maybe extend your legs forward. Point and flex your feet a few times. Wiggle your feet around. I'm going to suggest downward facing dog as a counter pose here. So you want to try downward facing dog. This is a yang arm balance pose. So hands and knees, root through your hands and your arms, tuck your toes under, and then press through your hands, your arms, your shoulders to lift your hips up towards the ceiling, and then lengthen out and neutralize your spine. So if that means you have to rearrange hands and feet, knees can be straight, knees can be bent. The point to downward facing dog is that you feel strong, your hands and your feet are rooted, and your spine is long here. And you can do little things. You can maybe take your dog for a walk or other things here. And then at some point slowly bring yourself back down to table pose. And then we'll get set up for the next yin posture. Next yin posture is called Sleeping Swan, and there'll be an alternative to this one if this one is a little bit too intense for you. So for Sleeping Swan, from hands and knees, bring your right foot up between your hands, inch the left knee back, and then start working that right foot over to the left side. You're going to start to lower your right knee and your hips and your torso towards the ground until they stop, wherever they stop for you. Now this is supposed to be a hip opener, not a knee opener. So if you start feeling sharp, biting, burning pain in the knee, bring this heel in closer to your hip. Now if you're someone who's really, really flexible and you don't feel anything in this pose, start moving this heel away from your hip until you start feeling something somewhere. And then we'll do Swan here for a moment. By the way, if you're feeling unstable in this pose, because your hips are high off the ground, place a prop underneath your hips and your thighs. I grabbed a block, but if you have a bolster, you can use a bolster. You can maybe use pillows and blankets here. Maybe do Swan for a moment. Swan is this just gentle back bend, and then very slowly lower your torso forward. You might have to stay up on, find your stopping point here. So if you go slowly, maybe you stop at your arms, maybe you get onto your forearms, maybe you make it all the way all to the floor here. So you're trying to find, so this is Sleeping Swan, and we'll stay here for a few minutes. Now for some of you, you're probably discovering that this is just not working for you at all. So an alternative hip opener is to slowly come out of this. Make your way onto your back, come into eye of the needle. So when you're on your back, both knees are bent. Place your right ankle on your left thigh. Right knee is bent and goes out wide. This is enough, you just stay here. If you need a little bit more oomph, more intensity, bring that left knee in and give the left leg a hug, either behind the left thigh or in front of the left shin until you have enough. So this is a nice alternative for if it's sometimes called reclined pigeon or reclined swan, just because it's just a variation of sleeping swan here. And we'll stay here for a couple more minutes or so. So the brown paper bag represents our ego. It represents the filing cabinets of credentials and labels and identities that we keep for ourselves, that we show other people and what other people know about us. So it's also what other people see when they see us. And I say this is all superficial because it's the outer self, it's not the inner self. And the true whole self is very vast. It's not just the brown paper bag, but we go around and for the most part, we pretty much content ourselves with just thinking about the brown paper bag. And it's for the most part just kind of this plain brown paper bag. It maybe has wrinkles in it and a few imperfections in it, and that's what we tend to over-focus on. But it's just the bag. It's just the shell around the luminaria. And it's the shell we put around the candle to kind of hide the candle here. So we hide what's inside the bag. It's just what we just want people to know. It's like, yeah, I'm just the bag. That's all I am, is just the bag. It's like, well, I hope you're not just the bag. And those of us who have thought about things realize that none of us are just the bag. We're actually way more than the brown paper bag. Here. So we have about 3 more breaths here on this side of Sleeping Swan. The next ingredient in these luminarias is the sand. So you can't really see it, but there's a little bit of sand in the bottom of the bag. And that's a handy thing to have, because if there's no sand, if there's any wind, the leg is just going to blow away and blow over. And that might not be such a great thing if you have a burning candle on the inside. We're coming out of this side of Sleeping Swan, so plant your hands, bring yourself up. You can come back into Swan here for a moment, and then bring yourself up. You can come up into Downward Facing Dog again. Again, you can skip Downward Facing Dog. There's something else to kind of work out the kinks here. But we'll go ahead and set up for the other side of this hip opener. So it's the other side of Sleeping Swan, or the other side of Eye of the Needle here. So for the other side, now it's the left leg in front, the right knee and back here. Kind of adjust things to your liking. Bring that left foot over to the right side, the opposite side of your mat. Lower the left knee, your hips, your torso. Find that place where everything stops. Decide if you need a prop, some padding somewhere here. Can do a little mini back bend here, and then slowly lower your torso to find its stopping point. Maybe you don't have to go anywhere. Maybe you got to stay here with arms straight. Maybe you can come onto forearms here on this side. Maybe you can come all the way down. Maybe you have to do Eye of the Needle here, even though you did Sleeping Swan perfectly fine on the other side. That's okay. It's okay to do that here. And then we'll stay here. A few more breaths here. So a couple more minutes, we'll hang out here in the Sleeping Swan. So the sand is a little bit like the paper bag. It's something that's common. So paper bags generally common to find Sand is usually something that you can come across here. It's not exotic, it's everywhere. And yet they're all needed. The bag is needed. The shell is needed. The sand is needed too to provide rootedness and an anchor, if you will, an inner ground, a sense of security and stability. And that's part of our inner nature, that's part of our true selves, is trying to cultivate, I call it the inner ground. It's like, what's that entity inside of you that creates safety and security and stability in your life? Because that's part of the real you here. And that's represented metaphorically by the sand here. So we have the paper bag, the superficial self. We have the things that anchor us, the things that provide rootedness, grounding, and stability. That's represented by a little bit of sand that gets placed in the bottom of the bag. And then finally, there's the candle. The lighted candle here, which pretty much represents a whole lot of our true selves. The candle itself is made of some sort of wax. It's kind of the energy. It's our inner energy, our inner motivation here. And when you light the candle, then that energy turns into light, turns into something that shines and illuminates the entire inside of the bag. And that's who we really are. That's part of the true self. That's that energy, that light. That's where we really are. And if you think about it, it's interesting because here we are trying to hide it behind this brown paper bag that we think is our real self, but it's just the superficial self. We have about 4 more breaths here on this side. So we finally come to the kind of the crux of the Luminaria, and that is the light of the candle itself. And that's the light of who we really are. It's the light of our manifestation in our embodiment. It's the light of connection. The connection of all the rest of who we are, but it's the connection that we have with our environment, with the rest of the universe. So it's connection with other people, but the connection with nature and with ourselves. And so that's kind of the profound symbology, the profound metaphor. You can come out of Sleeping Swan on this side. So slowly make your way up with your torso. You can use your hands and your arms. You can do Sleeping Swan here, or Sitting Swan if you would like here for a moment. And then slowly bring yourself out. You can do Downward Facing Dog, or just come to seated. One of the great counter poses that I like after a hip opener like that is Windshield Wipers. So you can come to seated, legs bent, feet hip width apart, and then lower your knees to one side, bring them back up to center, lower them to the other side, and just make a few slow and deliberate windshield wiper maneuvers here as you bob your knees from side to side. And then when you're ready, bring yourself. Our next skin posture is Sphinx Pose. Sphinx is this wonderful back bend where you basically bring yourself onto your belly, legs extend out behind you, elbows underneath your shoulders, approximately shoulder width apart. You want your elbows placed so that your torso weight goes through your arm bones so that you don't have to engage as much muscle here. And then you'll relax your torso, let your spine sag here. And then if you feel a little bit of compression in your spine, that's the point to Sphinx Pose here. If you're feeling too much, maybe just lower down onto your belly or put a prop underneath your upper torso. If you don't feel anything at all and you happen to have these two convenient blocks here, You can place the blocks underneath your elbows, and then that raises your torso up, and that might increase the intensity of the back bend enough to where you feel it here. So this is kind of handy to do just in case you have a little bit more supple spine here. And we'll stay here for a few minutes in Sphinx. So the idea is to relax the muscles in your torso. Let your spine sag to set up a light compression in your lumbar, in your sacrum here. And you can do whatever you need to with your head. You can keep it upright. This is a little bit young. You can release your head, or you can use extra props to kind of prop your forehead up here. I usually just hang out here with my head hung when I'm in Sphinx for a long period of time. Well, I'm going to hang out here for about 4 minutes. Again, you can decide if you want to go for that long or just stay as long as you want here. Check in with your breath. This is a good time now to start visualizing yourself as this in kind of a metaphorical sense. What part of you is the brown paper bag, the superficial self, and the ego? What part of you is the anchor, is the sand, is the stability and the rootedness? What part of you is the energy and the light that's trying to escape out through the paper bag? So the paper bag is trying to keep the light contained and hidden. But if you've ever seen a luminaria at night, the paper bag is not thick enough. It can't protect the light. Your light always gets, a little bit of your light always gets out, which means a little bit of your true self is always exposed. The paper bag, you can't hide it fully. And it turns it into this spectacular warm glow that you see. And you add those with hundreds of other luminarias out there. And this is why they're so popular here. Can't see them. I've got a few set up here in the room here. They don't look quite as spectacular because of all the light in the room. But as you can imagine, if it was dark, then you could actually see. You could see the light. You could see the inner light. And the inner light, of course, is metaphor. It's metaphor and symbology for the unique, wonderful, amazing, true self, the inner self that's within you. And we're feeling that right now in our yoga practices, through these sensations, through your breath, through your thoughts. You may not think them as quite so wonderful, but they are. This is what life feels like. And life is amazing because life always beats the alternative. So 1 more minute here, if that's appropriate. Check in with your inner ground, your anchor. Check in with your inner light and see what those entities think about staying here for a few more breaths. Just 1 more breath here, and then slowly bring yourself out. Maybe the easiest thing to do is gently to just lower yourself all the way onto the ground. You can maybe make a pillow with 1 hand stacked on the top of the other and just rest your head here. Just stay here for a breath or 2 to let your spine neutralize here. You can stay here, or a good counter pose is to find your favorite version of child's pose. So there's a lot of different variations of this posture. You can move your hips up and back towards your heels. Knees can be together, knees can be apart, arms can be forward, arms can be on either side. Maybe you like a little bit of some padding underneath your torso. Find your version of this posture. And then this is just a counter pose, so a couple of breaths here. And then when you're ready, make your way onto your back. A little bit of an integration before we come to our final resting pose. So a recline twist here. So on your back, legs comfortably extended out long, and then bend your right knee, bring your right knee into your torso. Give your right knee a hug first, and then keep your left hand on the right knee, and then guide the right knee over to the left as far as it goes so that your right hip is stacked and you're in a spinal twist. Right arm can come out into a T position or a cactus arm. It's okay with your head and your neck. You can turn and look to the right here. Just maybe one more breath here. And then bring that right knee back up. Extend the right leg out long. Bend the left knee. First give the left knee a nice hug. Hug it in tight towards the chest. And then take the right hand to guide the left knee over to the right side. Left arm extends out to the left. Head can stay neutral or head can turn here. And then just a couple of breaths here. And then bring things back to center. You can hug both knees. This is a little bit of free form yoga here. If there's any other kind of movements that your body is kind of wanting to do to work out some kinks, then do those now. And then come to your favorite resting pose here. I'm just going to practice the traditional Shavasana here. So you might like legs up the wall. Maybe you like seated meditation, so you can just sit quietly in meditation. Arms extended, maybe far enough from your torso so that your hands can just roll up, palms face towards the ceiling here. Legs are extended and far enough from each other so that they can gently roll to one side. Depends if you're externally or internally rotated. Maybe your legs want to roll inside or outside. It's okay which one does. This is you're setting yourself up for your resting pose here. You can always use a pillow underneath your head. If you're chilly, cover yourself in blankets or put on some extra clothing here. This is, initially, you want to think about the sand in the Luminaria. You're trying to create stability and security and comfort. And it all comes from that little bit of sand that's in the bottom of the Luminaria. So it's like, what do I need to do to feel more stable and secure in this pose? And so visualize the metaphor of the sand in the Luminaria here. And then maybe think about the candle, the light. What's your breath? Notice the rise and the fall of your torso, your rib cage. Every breath you take, and then use that breath to soften your face, soften your eyes, soften your brain here with every breath, with that light that's illuminating. That's your inner self, the light of the Luminaria. So this is in this resting pose, as you're softening and you're sinking into the floor, you can think about the different symbolic metaphorical parts of the Luminaria, how they correspond to your whole being. You can think about the egoic self, which is the paper bag. It's the superficial self, the self that we present to ourselves and to the rest of the world, that just basically runs basically is just, literally speaking, skin deep. It's just how we show ourselves to others, what we think about ourselves, what our own labels and identities that we give ourselves. That's all wrapped up in the paper bag. And then there's the sand, the inner ground, the inner anchor, inner rootedness, to keep everything from blowing away in a strong wind or in times of difficulty. And then finally the energy, the light, the connection that we try to hide with the paper bag, but the light is too bright. The light escapes, and we can see the light. We can see the light through the thin walls, the imperfect walls of the paper bag. You might notice that all the luminarias are also in a casserole dish. Well, that's just because I grew up in the Midwest, and if you grow up in the Midwest in the US, well, you have this irrational desire to put everything into a casserole dish. And just continue to notice your breath. That inner light. At some point, begin to deepen your breath. Make little motions with fingers, with toes. Increase that motion into hands and into feet, arms and legs. Even rock your head and your neck around gently from side to side. When you're feeling ready, gently bend your knees, roll over onto one side. Stay there. Stay there long enough to create a sense of gratitude for your practice, but also a deep sense of gratitude for you. You're very diverse and unique luminaria, your particular manifestation in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then when you feel ready, bring yourself up. Find one last comfortable seat. Draw your hands together in front of heart center. I'll end practice with an Om. The inner luminaria in me honors the inner luminaria in you. Namaste.